Now let's talk about one of the most important topics, that is exception handling. So first we understand what is an exception. An exception is a problem that arises during the execution of a program. It can occur for many different reasons. Let's say a user has entered invalid data, a file that has to be opened and cannot be found. Or you can say during the execution of the program a network connection has been lost, or JVM run out of memory. It could be anything. So some of the exceptions are caused by user error, or some of the exceptions are caused by programmer, or it could be due to any physical resource that have been failed in some manner. So now to exactly understand how exception handling works, there are basically three categories of exception. One is checked exception, runtime exception, and the other one are the errors. Now checked exception, if we talk about checked exception, it could be typically a user error or problem that cannot be foreseen by the programmer. For example, if a file has to be opened and the file is not found on the system, so in that case an error is occurred. So this exception cannot be simply ignored at the time of compilation. Now if we talk about runtime exception, then this could have been avoided by the programmer at the time of compilation of the code. It could be anything like the class is not found, or something is illegally declared in the program. And same way, if we talk about errors, then these are not exceptions. I mean, these errors are beyond the control of user or a programmer. It could be anything. It could be like a stack overflow, or a JVM error, Java virtual machine crashed, or something like that, which is not in the control of a programmer or a user. So those are called as error. So if we talk about some unchecked runtime exceptions, then these are some of the runtime exceptions, like arithmetic error, or it could be array out of bound index. Let's suppose we have defined array index as 2 and we are trying to accessing the index as 3, then we got an exception, that is array out of bound exception. If you're trying to divide some number by 0, we all know that a number cannot be divided by 0. So in that case we'll get some arithmetic exception. Now if we talk about the checked exception, these are the Java checked exception, like class not found. If you have declared anything illegally, it will throw as illegal access exception, that access to this class is denied, or such things. So these are called the Java checked exceptions, and this is basically the exception class hierarchy. You can see over here that throwable is a superclass and it has two subclasses, error and exception, and then exception has two subclasses, IO exception and runtime exception. So basically we do not need to go in depth with all these classes. We only gonna see how we gonna handle these exception in case of Selenium. Let's say if we talk about Selenium, if we are trying to trying to locate any element on a web page, and we have given some property of that element. So now what happens is that by somehow, let's say if we talk about any website, a website has all the elements like text box, links, checkbox, and submit buttons. And what happens is that while changing anything onto this web page, let's suppose a developer is the site is under the maintenance release, and developer is doing some changes on that web page, and by mistake he removes some element from the page, which we have already captured inside our Selenium code. So what happens is that when we execute our code, that element our code will not able to find that element, and in that case it will gonna throw an error. It will gonna throw an exception that this particular element is missing from the page. So we would handle that particular exception. We'll put it inside some try catch block, which we're gonna use it with the exception handling, which we're gonna do it with exception handling. So we're gonna see the syntax of exception handling, how we actually gonna implement the exception handling in case of Java or in case of Selenium. Now let's see some practical examples on how we can handle these sort of exceptions. So I'll go over here and let's say I'll create a new project for exceptions. So I'll select the Java project and give the project name as, let's say, Java exceptions. And I'll create a new class. Let's say I give this class name as any name. Let's say I give it as a name as test, and again in this test.java, what I'm gonna do is, let's say I write a line of code. Let's say I print beginning and then I print ending. In between, let's say I have to do some calculation. I am saying int divide equal to 10 divided by 5, and then printing this divide. Now when I execute it, it will give me 5 divided by 10 divided by 5. The result will be 2, right? Now what if instead of 5, if I write 0? So any number, no number can be divided by 0. So if I run it, I'm gonna get an exception. See, this is an arithmetic exception which is divided by 0. So it has thrown an exception over here. Now exception can come at any point of time. So I have a programming logic error over here. So I got an arithmetic exception. It could come at any line. So what I'll do, how will I be handling this sort of exception? Also, if you see, beginning is printed over here and ending is not printed. So if you see over here, there's an exception in the main thread, and it's at the line number 12, right? So at line number 12 we have this exception. So if you take your mouse over here, you'll get to see that this is the line where we have the exception. So as soon as the exception occurred, this program is terminated abruptly. Now how I going to handle these sort of situations, these sort of exception? How am I going to handle this in my code? So what I'll do, there's a syntax for implementing the exception, for doing the exception handling, and that is we need to open a try block. So this is a try block. Whatever code that we have, we will keep inside the try block. Let's say I keep the entire code inside the try block, and then I'll open another block, that is the catch block. So let me write the syntax and then I'll explain you what I'm doing over here. So inside the catch block, I'll let's say I'll print something that is like error occurred. Now what I have done over here is that whatever code, see, whenever there is an exception, my code gonna break abruptly. It will gonna terminate the program, and then it will not gonna execute any further code after the exception comes, right? At which line the exception come, it will not gonna proceed with the other lines. So after implementing this try catch block, after implementing this exception handling, what I will be doing is that, so let's say my entire code, like whatever that I think that I might have exception in that code, I'll put the entire code inside the try block, and whatever let's say in between, if there is any exception on the first line or the second line or the last line, so in between, whenever there is any exception, it will directly go to the catch block and do the thing that we have written inside the catch block, and then after it will gonna execute. It will be executing the further statements, right? So instead of throwable, see, you can see the throwable class over here. We have created object of throwable class. Instead of throwable, we can directly call this exception. Basically, this throwable is a super class for error as well as exception. So you can use this as well, and you can also call the exception exception class and create a object of this class exception E. And now when you run it, you can see beginning is printed, then the exception occurred, it directly gone to the catch block, it has printed the error occurred, and then after the catch block it has executed the ending statement. So basically what we did over here, we have caught the error, and that error was an exception in Java. So whatever that I have written, after which step, let's suppose at this point, this step we have exception, then the further code will not be executed, which is inside the try block. It will directly go to the catch block, and then after the catch block, whatever the code that we have, that will gonna execute, right? So in this case, let's say if I write something outside the try block, let's say I have some code before try block, I can write it over here. Then it is going inside the try block. I have printed beginning, and then after this division I'll print something like ending, and then after the try block I write after try catch block. And if I again make it correct, if I correct it to 5, then you can see when I run it, then before try block is printed, beginning is printed, then the division is printed, ending is printed, and the after try catch block is printed. Now you can see that it has, when we don't have any error, it has not gone inside the catch block, right? Because there was no exception, so it will not gonna handle anything. So it has just executed the entire code. And now when I again change it to 0, when I divide it to 0, then the exception will gonna occur. Then you can see before try block is printed, beginning is printed, then the statement which is after the try block, it will not going to print it, and then whatever there is inside the catch, the control will gonna go inside the catch block, and it will gonna print this catch statement. Whatever we have written inside it, it will gonna execute that code. And then after that, after the catch block, after the try catch block, this will also going to print. So we can have multiple try catch blocks as well in this code. Let's say if one of the try catch block is ending over here, after that I have some other code over here, I can also put that code inside a second try catch block, right? So in that code as well, if there is any exception that will occur, then there will be another catch block, it will gonna handle that particular exception, right? So now over here inside the catch block, if I try to print the object of this exception, see, this is the object of the exception class. So how we gonna know that this is object? If I say object dot, I'll get all the methods that is there inside this exception class. So if I say object dot get message, and I'll save it, I'll run it. Let's try printing it. If I print this message, you can see it has printed the exception, that this exception was divided by 0. And same way, if I want to print the stack trace, let's say if I say e dot print stack trace and also print it, oh sorry, I do not need to keep in this inside the system out print. So I'll just say e dot print stack trace and I'll run this. So it will gonna print the stack trace in red line, right? So if I don't write this, this will only gonna print the error message and the error record that we have printed. This e dot print stack trace will gonna let us know at which line the error occurred, and it will gonna tell us the type of exception that occurred and what is the class in which we have that error occurred. So this will gonna print the entire stack trace, right? Now that we have seen that with the help of this try and catch block, our program is not terminating abruptly, right? So we are able to handle these sort of exceptions, and there are other many exceptions. Let's say if I talk about one of the exception, if I create another class and there is, let's say we'll test some array over here, array exception. I'll give it a name as array exception, and in this let's say I'll declare an array. I'll create a array and say int I equal to array equal to new int, and I'll give the array indexes, let's say 4, and then let's say if I try to access the value of, or if I try to assign some value at the 5th index, I'll say in I5 equal to 100 and then save it. Now if I try to run it, then you can see I got an exception, that is array index out of bound exception at line number 10, right? Now again my program will terminate abruptly if I let's say if I have some beginning statement, some code over here and some code after this. Then again when I run this, then only the beginning will be printed and ending will not be printed. So again, in order to handle this exception, this sort of exception, I can put it inside the try catch block. Inside the catch I'll say exception e, and then over here I can like print some message like error occurred, and now when I run it, then you can see beginning is printed, ending is printed, and error occurred is printed.